My name is Clara Hayes. I am 36 years old. And exactly 48 hours before my younger brother's engagement party, my parents sent me an email with 4 conditions I had to meet if I wanted to walk through the front doors of the Hawthorne estate. I had to drop my quiet inquiry into the missing property dividends. I had to sign a retroactive power of attorney they had already drafted. I had to write a check for $40,000 to cover the unexpected catering overages. And finally, I had to stand on the terrace during the champagne toast and publicly declare that my brother, Julian, was the sole visionary behind the estate's recent renovations. At the very bottom of the email, my father had typed, "Agree to all 4 by midnight, Clara. We want this weekend to be perfect. Don't ruin it." I read the message 3 times. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my apartment. I looked at the timestamp. 10:14 p.m. They gave me less than 2 hours. They thought the deadline would panic me. They thought the fear of being the difficult sister at a black tie event would force me to fold, just like I had folded a dozen times before. Instead, that midnight deadline clarified everything. It wasn't a request. It was a ransom note. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I typed 4 words into a separate email draft, saved it, and closed my laptop. Then I packed a single overnight bag, booked a quiet cabin up in the mountains for the weekend, and called a specialized courier service about a final gift. The gift was a heavy, polished mahogany box. It looked elegant enough for a brother who was about to announce his engagement to the daughter of a venture capital billionaire. Inside, however, was something Julian had spent the last 18 months making sure I would never see. I knew he would open it publicly. He had already instructed the event planner to feature a family time capsule segment during the toast, where selected relatives would open commemorative gifts on the live stream. What Julian didn't know was that my gift contained no jewelry, no cash, and no nostalgic photographs. It contained a forensic timeline, a digital recording, and one document carrying a signature that looked exactly like mine, but was entirely, legally, and undeniably fake. Before I tell you what happened when that mahogany box was opened on the terrace, and why my brother's fiancée walked out before the champagne was even poured, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what is the weather like outside your window? I'm curious to see how far this story travels. Let me give you some context, because to understand why I mailed that box, you need to understand the Hawthorne estate, and you need to understand my family. The Hawthorne estate wasn't just a house. It was a sprawling, historic property on the coast of Maine, originally built by my great-grandfather. When my grandfather passed away 5 years ago, he left the estate to Julian and me in equal shares. But he attached a very specific, ironclad clause: no major structural changes, no commercial rezoning, and no sale of the property without the unanimous, notarized consent of both heirs. Julian is 3 years younger than me. He's charming, he's charismatic, and he has always been our parents' golden child. I'm the older sister. I'm the one who got the practical degree. I'm a commercial real estate developer. I look at blueprints, I check zoning laws, I balance spreadsheets. Julian looks at a room and sees how he can throw a party in it. For the first 2 years after Grandpa died, things were fine. I handled the back-end taxes, insurance, vendor contracts. Julian handled the vision. He wanted to turn the estate into a luxury boutique hotel and event space. I thought it was a solid business plan. I approved the initial loans. I signed the permits. But about 18 months ago, the numbers started to feel off. The estate was supposed to be generating revenue from corporate retreats and weekend weddings. But my share of the quarterly dividends kept shrinking. When I asked Julian about it, he'd wave his hand and say, "Clara, you have to spend money to make money. We're upgrading the HVAC system. We're redoing the guest cottages. It's all in the ledger." I asked to see the ledger. He sent me a beautifully formatted PDF, but I've been auditing real estate portfolios for 15 years. I know what a sanitized ledger looks like. The vendor names were vague. HJ Consulting, Apex Design Group. The amounts were just below the threshold that would trigger a secondary board review. I didn't want to believe my brother was stealing from me. I really didn't. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that my parents were right when they said I was too rigid, and couldn't let family just be family. So I did what I always do. I dug. I started pulling public county records. I checked the zoning permits. And that's when I found the first crack in the foundation. 6 months ago, a commercial parcel of land, about 4 acres at the edge of the estate, technically zoned for residential development, was quietly sold to a shell company called Mercer Holdings. The sale price was $1.2 million. I stared at the screen. I hadn't signed a deed of sale. I hadn't approved a rezoning application. I drove down to the county clerk's office the next morning. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, just breathing, trying to calm the sudden, sharp pounding in my chest. I walked inside, requested the original deed of transfer, and sat at a public terminal to read it. There, at the bottom of page 3, was my signature, Clara Hayes. It looked like my signature. The loop of the C, the sharp cross of the T in Hayes. But I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that I had never signed that document. I took a photo of it with my phone, drove back to my apartment, and locked my door. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried, not because of the money, but because of the realization that my brother, the guy I used to build blanket forts with, the guy I bilayed out of college debt, had looked me in the eye over Thanksgiving dinner and lied to my face. I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Lynn. I sent her the photo. She called me back 10 minutes later. "Clara," she said, her voice dead calm, "this is a forged signature, and if they sold this land without your consent, they didn't just breach the trust. They committed fraud. I need you to not say a word to them. Do not confront him. Do not call your parents. Let me pull the full file." For 3 weeks, I played the part of the oblivious sister. I went to Sunday dinners. I smiled when my mother asked why I looked so tired. I nodded when my father talked about how proud he was of Julian's business acumen. Every time Julian hugged me, I felt sick. Sarah's investigation uncovered the rest. Julian hadn't just sold the 4 acres. He had taken out a $2.5 million commercial loan against the main estate, using a forged power of attorney that supposedly gave him unilateral control over the property's finances. And where did the money go? $800,000 went into Julian's personal accounts. $400,000 was used to buy a penthouse condo in Boston, and the remaining $1.3 million, it was funneled into the down payment for the engagement ring and the luxury lifestyle he was using to impress his new fiancée, Sophie. Sophie was lovely. She was an architect, actually. Smart, grounded, completely unaware that the man she was about to marry was funding their future with stolen money and forged documents. I actually liked her, which made this so much worse. Then came the email, the 4 conditions. They knew I was asking questions. Julian had probably noticed me pulling the county records, so they decided to go on the offensive. The retroactive power of attorney they wanted me to sign wasn't just to cover the past, it was a legal shield. If I signed it, I would be legally validating the forged loan and the illegal land sale. The $40,000 for catering was just to humiliate me, to make me pay for my own erasure. And the speech. That was to publicly bind me to his lie, in front of Sophie's wealthy family. I looked at the mahogany box, sitting on my dining table. I didn't want to ruin the wedding. I really didn't. I wanted to just take Julian to court quietly, get my money back, and walk away. But Sarah told me something that changed my mind. "Clara," she said over the phone, "if we just sue them, they will drag this out for years. They will claim you gave verbal consent. They will claim you were negligent. And in the meantime, Julian will use Sophie's family money to pay off the loan, bury the evidence, and walk away clean. The only way to stop the clock is to make the fraud public before the ink on any marriage license dries. Sophie's family needs to know who they are marrying into." So I built the gift. I spent 2 days in my home office. I compiled the county records. I pulled the bank routing numbers showing the money flowing into Julian's personal accounts. I even found a voicemail Julian had left for a contractor, casually mentioning, "Don't worry about Clara's signature. I have a guy who can replicate it, just get the permits filed." I had the audio transcribed and notarized. I put it all on an encrypted USB drive. I printed the forged deed, the fake POA, and the bank statements. I put them in a thick, sealed manila envelope. Then I wrote a letter. Julian, it read, "You asked me to sign away my rights to preserve your perfect weekend. I declined. Enclosed is the true history of the Hawthorne estate. It's time you shared it with your guests." I sealed the box. I handed it to the courier, and then I drove up to the mountains. The weekend of the engagement party arrived. I was sitting on the porch of my cabin, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog roll through the pine trees. My phone was sitting on the table next to me, open to the live stream of the event. At 6:00 p.m. Eastern Time, the live stream went live. The Hawthorne estate looked breathtaking. String lights were wrapped around the ancient oak trees. The terrace was packed with people in tuxedos and evening gowns. I saw my parents, looking radiant and stressed. I saw Julian, wearing a sharp navy suit, his arm wrapped tightly around Sophie, who looked stunning in a simple emerald dress. The event planner, a woman named Diane who I had worked with for years, took the microphone. She gave a lovely speech about love and family. Then she smiled at the camera. "And now," Diane said, "we have a special tradition, the time capsule. Julian, Clara, and their parents have prepared some special commemorative gifts to be opened right now, to be shared with everyone here and those watching online." My heart was hammering against my ribs. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. Julian stepped up to the microphone. He looked directly into the camera. He knew I was watching. He smiled, a tight, arrogant little smile. "Thank you, Diane," Julian said. "I know my sister Clara couldn't be here tonight. She's been dealing with some personal stress. But she sent a gift. She always was the thoughtful one." He gestured to a table. A waiter brought out the mahogany box. Julian untied the ribbon. He lifted the lid. He pulled out the manila envelope first. He looked confused. He opened it, pulled out the first page, the forged deed of sale, and frowned. He looked up at my parents. My mother leaned in, whispering something to him. Then Julian pulled out the USB drive. He looked at it, then looked back at the camera. His smile was gone. "Clara," he said, his voice tight, "I don't know what this is supposed to be, a joke." He reached into the box and pulled out my letter. He unfolded it. He read it silently. I watched his face. I watched the color drain out of his cheeks. I watched his eyes widen, just a fraction, in pure, unadulterated panic. "Julian," Sophie said, stepping closer to him. "What is it? What does it say?" Julian didn't answer her. He looked at the event planner. "Turn off the camera," he hissed. "Cut the feed." Diane looked confused. "Julian, we're live. The family in London is watching." "I said cut the feed," Julian shouted. But it was too late, because I hadn't just sent physical documents. I had also emailed a secure, unlisted link to the estate's AV technician, with instructions to play a specific video file at exactly 6:15 p.m. At 6:15 p.m., the massive LED screen behind the stage flickered. The live feed of the terrace was replaced by a black screen with white text. The Hawthorne estate, a financial timeline. The ballroom went dead silent. The chatter stopped. The clinking of glasses stopped. 300 people turned to look at the screen. The first slide appeared. It was a side-by-side comparison of my real signature and the forged signature on the deed of sale. The second slide showed the bank routing numbers. $800,000 transferred to Julian Hayes' personal checking. The third slide was a screenshot of the shell company, Mercer Holdings, and its registered agent, Julian Hayes. I watched the live feed. I saw Sophie's parents, Robert and Alina, standing near the front. Robert's face was like stone. Alina's hand was covering her mouth. I saw my father step forward, trying to block the screen, waving his arms at the AV booth. "Turn it off, it's a hack. Someone hacked the system," he yelled. But the AV technician, following my explicit instructions, locked the booth and kept the presentation running. The fourth slide was the audio recording. I had transcribed it, but I also included the audio file. Julian's voice, clear as day, echoed through the massive terrace speakers. Don't worry about Clara's signature. I have a guy who can replicate it. Just get the permits filed before she notices the quarterly report. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Julian was frozen. He was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a deer in headlights, if the deer was also realizing it was standing in front of a firing squad. Sophie turned to him. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for a lie, looking for an explanation. "Julian," she said, her voice quiet but carrying perfectly in the silent room. "Did you forge her signature?" Julian looked at her. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at my parents. My mother was crying, silently, her hand gripping my father's arm. My father was staring at the ground. "Julian," Sophie said again, her voice hardening. "Did you use my family's capital to pay off a loan you took out with stolen money?" "Sophie, please," Julian whispered. "Let me explain, it's complicated. Clara is just, she's trying to ruin this. She's jealous." "Jealous," Sophie repeated. She looked at the screen, where the final slide was now displayed. It was a simple sentence. Consent obtained through fraud is not consent. Sophie reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace Julian had given her just that morning. She held it out to him. "I don't think there's anything left to explain," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was an architect. She knew when a foundation was rotten. She turned and walked off the terrace. Her parents followed her without a single word. Julian stood there, holding the necklace, looking around the room. 300 guests were staring at him. Some were whispering. Some were taking photos. Some were just shaking their heads. My father grabbed the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please. This is a private family matter. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. The bar is still open, please enjoy the evening." But the evening was over. The spell was broken. People started leaving. They didn't run, but they moved with a quiet, deliberate finality. They gathered their coats, they nodded politely to my parents, and they walked out to their cars. I sat on my cabin porch, watching the live feed as the terrace emptied. The string lights still glowed. The ice sculptures were still melting, but the party was dead. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "The county clerk just received the formal fraud report. The freeze on the estate accounts is in effect. Good job, Clara." I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I had just burned my family to the ground to save myself. The aftermath was exactly as messy and painful as you'd expect. Julian tried to sue me for defamation. Sarah buried him in motions. He tried to claim the audio was deep-faked. The digital forensics expert I hired proved it was recorded on his own iPhone. Sophie's family pulled their funding for the hotel project. Without the capital, and with the estate accounts frozen by the bank due to the fraud investigation, Julian couldn't make the loan payments. The bank foreclosed on the main house 6 months later. My parents lost their retirement. They had co-signed the commercial loan, thinking Julian's business genius would pay it off. When the bank called the note, they had to liquidate their own home to cover the deficit. They moved into a small condo in Florida. They blame me for that. My mother still sends me emails, usually around the holidays, telling me that I destroyed the family, that I could have handled it quietly, that I was cruel. I don't reply. Julian is working as a mid-level property manager in Ohio. He's not allowed to practice real estate in Maine anymore. He's paying restitution to the bank, a little bit every month. As for me, I kept my share of the estate. The bank allowed me to buy out the foreclosed portion at a discount, since I was the co-heir. I'm renovating the 4 acres Julian illegally sold. I'm building a small, sustainable housing community for first-time homebuyers. I'm using the money Julian stole to build something real, something that belongs to me. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I regret exposing him at the party, if I regret making it so public, so humiliating. And the truth is, I don't. Because if I had done it quietly, if I had just taken him to court behind closed doors, my parents would have protected him. They would have paid off the debt, swept it under the rug, and told me I was overreacting. Julian would have learned nothing, and he would have done it again. By making it public, I took away their ability to lie. I took away the shield of family privacy that they had used to hide his abuse for years. It wasn't about revenge. Revenge is wanting someone to hurt. This was about accountability. It was about looking at a rotten structure and refusing to paint over the cracks. I still miss them sometimes. I miss the way my dad used to teach me to drive. I miss the way my mom used to make hot chocolate when it snowed. I miss the brother who used to share his Halloween candy with me. But I realized a long time ago that you can miss the people your family used to be without letting them destroy the person you are becoming. So I want to ask you, if you were in my shoes, if your family demanded you sign away your rights, your voice, and your truth just to keep the peace at a party, would you have opened the box, or would you have let them keep their secrets? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for sitting with me in the quiet. And remember, you don't owe anyone your silence just because they share your last name. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.